everyone, it is Jazz here. It is finally time for my July reading wrap-up, and you'll want to strap in because I have 7 books to talk about, so let's just jump into these 7 reading reviews. The first book that I ended up completing in July was a book that I have been reading on and off in audiobook for quite a bit, and it is Billy Idol's memoir, Dancing with Myself. So it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of the summary. Now, there were some things that I kind of expected about this book, and then there were some really unexpected things about this book which were very interesting, and I also had a great deal of fun listening to this in audiobook. It is read by Billy Idol, so I always love to listen to memoirs when they're read by the people that have actually written them. I think it's really great to just hear them speak their own words. Like I said, there are some things that I definitely expected to be part of this book. Of course, he is a rock artist, and thus the predominant bit of this book is about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some of those things are described in great detail, and I have to say that sometimes that didn't bug me, and sometimes I was like, Billy, I love you, but I don't want to know that much about you, okay, man? But those are parts of his life, and he did choose to include them, and he's just trying to be honest. So you can't really fault the book for kind of being what I expected it to be in terms of that. However, there were some really great unexpected moments about this book. I really think he uses this really nice element of imagery, and there's a kind of poeticness to the writing style of the book, which I guess I should have expected because he writes songs, but I also didn't expect that because it's a memoir, and sometimes people don't think about putting cool metaphors and similes into their memoirs. So I thought that was really cool, and I also found it really cool just hearing about his childhood and some of his things about his family and how they were involved in his life. And I also found it really interesting in terms of the music. And a lot of this predominantly is about the music and different albums that he made, different groups that he worked with, how different songs were put together and written. And as a person that is a musician, I found all those things really, really interesting. And I think even people that aren't musicians would probably find those things really interesting, especially if you are a fan of Billy Idol's music. It did make me realize that I do tend to listen to more of Billy Idol's later work than some of his earlier stuff. So it made me want to listen to more of his earlier music and really get to hearing the nuances that he talked about in the book about how the songs came together. Even though this did kind of have the typical memoir things that happen where the story gets a little like repetitive because things in your life are actually sometimes repetitive, or things are kind of like not in a linear storyline because also your life works like that and your memory works like that. I have to say that it is a pretty interesting, enjoyable book. If you are a fan of his music, I think you will really enjoy this. If you want to like just see what Billy Idol's life is about, I think you will find this interesting. I gave this book 4 stars. The next July book that I completed was The Clockwork Princess, which is the 3rd book in the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare, and it is one of those Shadow Hunter novels. So I can't really summarize this one because obviously it would spoil the rest of the series, so I'm just going to jump into my general thoughts on this. A lot of people talk about how much they particularly love this one, and thus I kind of went into it really hoping to love it, and guess what? I really loved it, and I was super happy with the way I felt about the book. It was also a super fast read, even though it is a rather thick kind of book, even though I read it in ebook, obviously. Really felt for all the characters, really loved the structure of how the novel was laid out. Of course, the world just developed more, and I thought that was really interesting. Lots of great reveals because it is the final book, and so thus we can now tell you stuff. It had a really good balance of romance and action, which you know makes me super happy when we can have both and have a nice balance with the two. And I really have to applaud Cassandra Clare for making that love triangle like well written and make sense. You go, girl. It's very rare that a book can make me cry and this book made me tear up about twice and full on, like, tears streaming down my face, cry for at least one time. But I feel like that's just a testament to how much the writing really spoke to me and how much the characters really just spoke to me. So yes, let's just leave it at Jazz loved Clockwork Princess, and I will definitely, like, reread this series and read that book again. I gave Clockwork Princess 5 stars, and I would probably give the whole trilogy of Infernal Devices as a whole a 4.5 because it was really excellent. I just kind of thought the first book was 4-starry, but everything else was 5-starry. So it's definitely an excellent trilogy to check out, and you can kind of read this one on its own separate from Mortal Instruments. So if you want to do that, highly recommend, especially if you like steampunk, urban fantasy type things. Third book that I read was a reread of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, but in this fabulous annotated edition. I'm gonna keep my summary short because I'm assuming that most of you probably know what Pride and Prejudice is about, but it is about a young woman named Elizabeth Bennet who meets a wealthy man named Mr. Darcy, and they completely misunderstand each other, and these misunderstandings cause a lot of issues, but you know, family drama ensues, and then things happen. I don't know. That was the weirdest Pride and Prejudice summary I bet you've ever heard. So I've been wanting to reread Pride and Prejudice for a really long time, especially as an adult, because I read it for the first time, I believe, when I was in 8th grade or something, and there's just a lot of things about the writing itself that I didn't really remember, so I was really glad just to read the book just in its entirety for that reason. But I also had a great time reading this in annotated edition because it does have all these fabulous annotations on the side, and all these things are things that are about the time period, different things are going on. It also explains some words that maybe are used differently in the time period of the book setting as opposed to how we would use those words now. It also explains some unfamiliar words that you might not know. It kind of tells you how much money Mr. Darcy really would have in modern times. Let me tell you, the man is a millionaire. And another thing that was really cool about this annotation is it does kind of go through books that Jane Austen would have read at the time that might have inspired some elements of this novel, or kind of explained what she was thinking when she was going for different things in this novel, and that was something unexpected, and I thought that was a really cool element. And I also found it really fun knowing what some of the card games were during the, you know, free moments when they play cards. I just kind of found that really interesting. As for the book itself, I of course already really loved the book, but I think I ended up falling more in love with the book. First of all, because the annotations did kind of give more depth to the characters than I had thought about before, and that was quite interesting, and it really made me appreciate like the pros and the cons of each character, and how she kind of does do really good at having really interesting, flawed people as opposed to just like having perfect little characters that run around. And I think that gives a really cool flavor to the writing. And also in terms of the writing, I realized that I was really enjoying the rhythm, the way she structures her sentences and all those things. I think Jane Austen is one of the few authors that really can get away with that long sentence thing that you know that I don't particularly like, but Jane Austen, I feel like, does it right for my brain. Like, something about the way she does it just floats my boat. So this book obviously got 5 stars because I love it and I think it's awesome just on its own, but I additionally loved the annotations in this and how researched those were. If you're someone that loves Pride and Prejudice, I would really recommend getting this annotated edition, as well as somebody that maybe is reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time would probably get some enjoyment out of reading this, just because it does kind of go through those unfamiliar words things and stuff like that. So you might find some enjoyment in just kind of getting that extra info when you're reading this for the first time. The next 4 books that I read were books that I read for the Booktubeathon, so you can kind of consider them Booktubeathon wrap-up as well. I ended up doing a reread of Natalie Babbitt's Tuck Everlasting. This is about a 10-year-old girl named Winnie Foster. Her parents basically own the whole town. They're pretty wealthy, but because of kind of their existence, they end up keeping Winnie kind of trapped in their yard. She's just trapped in the fence. And one day she kind of gets tired of that, and she says, I'm going to go and escape this and have a little tiny bit of adventure. So she goes beyond her fence into the woods, and she ends up meeting the Tuck family, and they can apparently live forever, and then insanity ensues. So I have always really enjoyed Tuck Everlasting. I think that it's so cool that it's a very short book, but it also says a lot. It really gets to the meat of the point of what it's saying about life and living forever and whether that's a good thing or not. And it's just a really cool thing to think about at any age, whether you're a kid or you're an adult. And I also have to say that I noticed a lot in this book that the story does move really, really quickly from one scene to another. So it's definitely a fast-paced read, not just because it's short, but also because of the way the book is structured. So I just had a really cool time rereading this. I used to reread it every year, but I missed last year and I really missed reading it. So that's why I wanted to make sure I got to rereading it this year. But I felt like it felt different this time, I guess because I did skip that year. There were like lines in it that I had underlined because I really love them, but then I was like, you know what? I don't love that line as much as I did. I now love this line that is after it, and I thought that was really just a cool thing about the way your mind changes when you've read something over and over every year, as opposed to when you take a year from it and kind of like let yourself read it in a different way. And so I thought that was a really interesting element of this, but I still love the book. I just saw new things in it this time, and I thought that was very, very cool because it's been a while since I've seen new things about this book. I really loved it. There were new things that I saw, and I decided to still give this one 5 stars on my reread. Apparently it was the month of rereads because then I did yet another reread, and this one was a reread of the 5th Sandman graphic novel, A Game of You. So I am just gonna kind of not summarize this one so much just because I find it very difficult to summarize any Sandman novel because they're really complex, but also because this is the 5th one and, you know, spoilers. Like all Sandman novels, this one is definitely a little on the dark and disturbing side, but that's just what the general tone of Neil Gaiman's Sandman is. Am I right? If you've read it before, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't been introduced to this world, just know that that is part of the world, and if you're easily disturbed, this might not be for you, but I personally am not easily disturbed, so I find that stuff really interesting and engrossing, but you know, that just, it depends on the kind of person you are. This one does not focus so much on the endless characters such as Dream or Death or any of the siblings. It does focus more on sort of side characters. It is about different characters, and that is actually kind of a good thing. It just kind of gives the brain a different thing to look at as part of the world and how the world works. It is also just kind of interesting how the story crosses from the real world into sort of the dream world from a just normal human's point of view. So my goal is to reread the first 6 of these graphic novels before jumping into reading 7 through I think 10 just for the first time, just to kind of refresh my memory because it is a very complex world. And in my reread of the first 6, I'm really starting to notice which ones are more of my favorites and which ones are very, very excellent, but maybe not my favorites. I have to say this kind of goes in that second category, even though I think the story is really interesting and wonderful and well put together. It's not my super favorite out of some of the other ones, just because I do kind of miss Dream and the Endless and things in this one. Even though they are part of this one, they're not really in there until like little interludes or the end. And there are just certain elements of this that I like more than others. So it's not my super favorite out of the whole entire series, but it is still really, really good. So I decided to give this 4.5 stars. I still think it's a really cool story, and I also think it's a really important graphic novel in terms of the world as well as the Death spin-off comics. So if you're planning to check out any of the Death graphic novels, you'll probably want to check this one out first. Then I had a little bit of a self-help read in July, and that was Living with Dyspraxia. It had 3 authors, but I believe it was mostly authored by Mary Coley. This book was made to help develop coping skills for people with adult dyspraxia. And as an adult with dyspraxia, I decided to pick up this book just because I was really struggling with some elements of it as an adult that I hadn't experienced before, and it was kind of throwing me for a loop and making me kind of a sad person, even though I'm really happy on my channel. So I thought better try to get more information on this. So dyspraxia is a developmental condition. It's also sort of a learning difference because it does not only affect your motor skills, but also your sensory input, as well as different things with your speech or your eye focus and all those crazy things that you need in life. It is literally the reason why some of these videos have more jump cuts than others, because my brain has a little bit of a hiccup in it, and it's a neurological thing, so sometimes I can't help it. But I'm working on it, and that's the important thing. So what I found really interesting about this book is, first of all, just learning more about how to help myself, and also learning more about what having dyspraxia means. This does a really good thing by listing all the things that might affect you if you have dyspraxia. Some people might have less of other things than others. Like, I feel like some of my motor skills are better because I have done dance, things like that, that work both sides of my body and kind of cross the hemispheres of my brain. So those things have helped me in certain motor skill areas, but I might have to work on some other areas. It helped me figure out, first of all, what are things that I can expect from this as an adult, as well as things that might help me improve some of these things that I'm experiencing, such as I might have to focus more on really being relaxed, and also really making sure that I exercise every day, and maybe also seeking some additional help, such as going to see if I can get some more diagnosis on dyspraxia, as well as maybe some occupational therapy for certain elements. And also, it is written by people that understand the condition for dyspraxia. They know that we need like bullet points as opposed to like a ton of really huge paragraphs. So it is laid out to work for the dyspraxic brain, and I really appreciated that element as well. This also does a really good job at helping to break down some of the things that you need to do just to get through just everyday life and make it a little bit easy for you, because there are a ton of things that are really difficult for me and probably even more difficult for other people with dyspraxia. It is really hard for us to organize different ways of thinking, and it also is really hard to do just certain easy things like cut our food with a knife or even drive. I have not been able to learn how to drive. I really would like to, but the coordination of that is very overwhelming, and I also get very sensorily overstimulated. So sometimes I will just randomly burst into tears, which when you're 30 is really, really odd to people. And it's something that's coming from a neurological thing, so I can't necessarily always control it the way I would like. But this book does offer tips to think about for certain situations where that kind of thing might happen, and certain things that you can do to kind of help you seek help. And it also kind of helped me see that the feelings that I'm feeling about this are not abnormal for somebody that has dyspraxia. There are other people that have this, and they have often felt the same feelings. Now, there were 2 reasons why I kind of decided to give this 4 stars instead of 5. First of all, it's self-help nonfiction, which if you're a really big fiction reader is not super fun. And the other reason is that it was definitely focused towards people that lived in Britain or the UK, which is kind of predominantly where dyspraxia, I believe, was discovered, and I think it's been studied more in the UK. So I think that is why it is more focused towards people in the UK. So there are certain things as somebody that lives in the US that I would have to go and look up and see if some of the benefits or some of these ways to seek help actually exist here, and they might not. And thus, some of this book is not accessible to me because I live in the US, but I still feel like there's a lot of really good information in there. So be it that you live in the UK or in the US, I would recommend checking out and reading it if you do think you have dyspraxia, or you do think that you might have a child with dyspraxia or something like that. It probably would be something that would help you kind of get an idea of what you're working with. Whew, that was hard to talk about because it felt very scientific. All right, let's move on back to fiction. So the last book that I completed in July was Juniper Lemon's Happiness Index by Julie Israel. So this was the book that we all read as a group for Booktubeathon, and I always like getting a good book recommendation, so I decided to check it out. It is about a teenage girl named Juniper Lemon. Her sister has died in an accident, and she is basically trying to work her way through those feelings and what kind of happened in the aftermath with her family, with her friends, and things like that because of her sister's death. And why it's called Juniper Lemon's Happiness Index is because she makes these little index cards that basically record like the good and the bad things that happened throughout the day. It's definitely something when your like brain is ready for that good contemporary thing that you'll definitely want to pick up. I feel like the goal of this book was to really, find something positive out of something negative, and I think it really shows in the way the book is written. Even though there are some tough subjects and some sadder subjects, you never feel sad. The writing kind of leads you in this way to almost think of the positive elements of what's going on, which I think is really effective in the way the author put the book together, and I think that was really her goal. I also really enjoyed the dialogue and the characters, and I listened to this in audiobook, and I thought the audiobook was really well narrated. I thought the narrator sounded like a teenage Juniper Lemon, which I think is the way you want to go, and she did really good though at differentiating the voices and things like that, so you knew who was talking, and I thought that was really excellent as well. The only thing I would say is that the index card element, which Juniper Lemon does on different days, probably would have gone over better in my brain in writing, but otherwise I think that after I got used to it, I got used to that being an element and paid a little bit more attention to those elements so I could visualize them better in my mind even though I was listening. I felt like I enjoyed the characters and the writing style and the dialogue a little bit more than I enjoyed the actual plot. Not that the plot was bad by any means, and I don't have a problem with the ending like I think a lot of other people might have a problem with the ending, but I kind of got what she was doing with the ending. So I guess that part didn't bug me, but as a arc of the plot, I felt like there were like some slower points. Now what got me through the slower points were the fact that I really enjoyed the characters and what they were saying. I think I would have preferred that the plot been more consistent. But otherwise, I really did think it was a very fun read, and I really enjoyed Juniper Lemon's journey, and I think that is the important element of what the story was going for, so I feel like it did an effective job. So I decided to give Juniper Lemon's Happiness Index 4 stars. So those are my thoughts on the 7 books that I read in July, and I'm sure this was the longest video in the world, so thank you for hanging in there and hearing all my thoughts. But you know, I had to talk about a lot of different things, lots of different nonfiction things, so woo, craziness. I'm not gonna make a to be read for August, first of all, because I am doing the Tome Topple Readathon, and I did make a TBR for that. I will link you to that in the description. I'm sure because those books are very large that I'll still be reading some of those books throughout August. And also, I think once finishing maybe 3 or 4 big tomes, I will probably want to just, you know, free read. On a side note, I did yesterday reach 200 subscribers, and I really wanted to thank you guys so much for subscribing, because it means a lot to me, and I think it's so awesome that you want to sit here and watch me and hear what I think about things, and I really am so very thankful for that. But also, I would like to do something to commemorate the 200ness. So I was wondering what other people's ideas are on that. I'd like to do something that you guys would like. I'm leaning towards doing a question and answer type video. If you would like to see that, please let me know in the comments, and let me know what you think of doing a Q&A for 200 subscribers or something like that. And that is all that I have to say for today, my fabulous ones. Thank you for watching. Bye!